Okay, so how does the editing process for picture books differ before the editor sees it versus after the editor gets it? Okay. Okay, I think the easiest way to answer this question is to give you a couple of examples. The picture book market is really, it's one of those categories where everyone thinks they can do it, and it's while all of publishing is subjective, on the fiction side is subjective, the picture book market, I feel, is incredibly subjective. Like, I can read a manuscript because, of course, you don't send the illustrations in with the manuscript. So when you're reading it, you're trying to, in your mind's eye, picture what you think the illustrations are going to look like. So I'm reading this manuscript, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, I see what this is going to look like, and I can hear the rhythm, and I can see that this person has rounded out the story, and I can see young kids really being engaged in this manuscript. So sometimes, like, especially with manuscripts that rhyme, which I typically don't like, I oftentimes go back to the author and say, okay, let's look at the rhythm of this, and let's look at the rhyme and see whether or not there's anything forced, because most picture book editors, I don't know, every time I think about sending them a manuscript that rhymes, I get really nervous because a lot of them just don't like it. You would think that they would, but they just don't like rhyming manuscripts. So anyway, I typically do, hold on. Okay, let me finish that other question real quick. So I typically, I just sold a book to Simon & Schuster, and it was a book with Arun Gandhi, who's Gandhi's grandson, and Bethany Hegedus was the writer on that manuscript, and we went back and forth on edits with that manuscript so many times. It was like we were really trying to capture the full essence of his story, which is hard to do in very short form like a picture book. So I would say we probably did about, at a minimum, 10 rounds of edits on it. I can't wait until that manuscript comes out because I think it's going to be incredible. But once we sent it to the editor who we were working with, she did 3 more rounds of edits on it. So it really varies, but you'd be surprised how many revisions you can go through even on a picture book. Okay, let me find this other question. It's skimmed up here. Okay. Okay, so she says, if you have a 20-year-old, and should you query YA, adult, or both? I feel like my novel would best fit in the YA market, but would most agents consider 20 too old for that? That's a good question. There are a lot of adult publishers who have started YA, not imprints, but they're starting to acquire YA, and they'll go up a little bit higher than the 18-year-old cutoff for the children's book market. So if you're, say for example, you are querying, if your agent sends the manuscript out to a Scholastic, a 20-year-old would be too old. But if, I know St. Martin's, for example, in their adult division, they're really interested in YA, they go a little bit higher. So it's almost like this, what we're calling YA plus. So it covers like the first 2 years of college. I would say your agent will have a sense of who would be the ideal editor who would be interested in characters who are a little bit older. Okay, the question is, do you have a set pattern or routine when it comes to revisions? What do you revise first? We're primarily talking fiction. Is that a fiction or nonfiction? Okay, fiction. Okay, yeah. With fiction, what I typically like to do is I like to write the entire story, and then I go back and I read it out loud, chapter by chapter. I want to make sure that I understand if the voice of the characters are strong. Sometimes, just like when you're writing, sometimes you think you have really captured something until you read it out loud, and you're like, that sounds a little stilted, or it doesn't flow like I thought it should flow. So then I'll write the manuscript, I'll read it out loud, and then the parts that need revision, they kind of jump out at you. And then I also have readers who will take a look at my manuscripts and try and tell me, give me feedback as to which areas need a lot of work or don't need a lot of work. But I always work with other people, because I think at a certain point you get too close to your work and it's very difficult for you to evaluate. Okay, the question is, if we have ideas or projects for adult readers, should we mention that as well in a query, or should we concentrate on children's YA first? Okay, as an agent, I'm an agent that covers both the children's and adult categories, but a lot of agents don't. A lot of adult agents don't touch children's and YA, and there are a lot of children's and YA agents who don't really go into the adult category. So I think the first thing you need to figure out when you're querying an agent is whether or not they do both categories. If you as an author know that you're going to be interested in doing both YA children's and adult, it's ideal for you to approach agents who do both categories. Now, you can have two agents. You can have a children's book agent and you can have an adult agent, but it does make life a little bit more complicated. You have two people to work with, two different styles typically. So that's the first part of that question. If you have identified that an agent is working in both categories, then I think it is ideal to let the agent know that, yes, while you are pitching this project, you have interest in doing adult fiction as well. Because as an agent, I'm looking for people who have multiple projects in them, not just like a single project. And if I know that you're kind of franchisable in more than one genre or more than one category, it helps me a lot, because it's easier for me to have 4 authors who do 40 books than, what is that, 4 times 40? 160 authors. Okay, what is something you wish would come across your desk soon? Is there a specific wish on your list? Well, if you had asked me this question about 6 months ago, I would have said, or maybe a year ago, I would have said, oh, I'm looking for something steampunk, but I think everybody's kind of tapped into that now. Usually, a lot of times when people ask me, what am I looking for, a lot of times I don't know until I see it. But I will say that I'm looking for something very commercial. If you look at my list, I have done a lot of historical fiction and more serious fiction. I'm looking for something commercial and fun and something that would easily translate into film. Okay, the question is, as an author agent, what advantages can you offer to a potential client that might make them choose you over another agent? Okay. Well, I think one thing that, as an agent, I travel a lot. I do about 20 conferences a year. I do about 20 conferences a year, and when I do those conferences, I'm always talking about my authors and their books. So it's almost like you have a walking promotion, and that's very useful because I'm talking to the people who would typically buy your books and people who would, the readers of your manuscripts or your books. So that's one thing. Sometimes people will say, well, if you're an author, do you have time to work with me as an agent? Like, do you have time to work with me if you're out doing conferences? But you'll find that just as important, I'm about the business side of the business, of agenting, and so I'm out there trying to get a sense of what other projects are out. You know, I'm keeping my finger on the pulse of what's happening literally. And if you send me a manuscript in that I've heard that same concept 3 and 4 and 5 other times at different conferences, I'm able to tell you, you know what, that category or what you're trying to write about right now, and pretty soon that's going to be inundated. It's not going to be fresh. So I have a sense of what's happening out there in the world. That's one thing. The other thing is, as an author myself, I totally understand and can really appreciate the process of writing and how difficult it can be. And some of my authors have told me that they appreciate the counseling that I give, just in terms of writer's block and some of the alternative things that I tell them that they can do to kind of get over that. So there's an appreciation for the process. When you say, the question is, can you tell us a little bit about your book and your process? Which process? What do you mean?